This is a camera comparison test of the new Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus, starting at about $1,100 versus last year's iPhone XS, which a year ago cost about the same, but of course it's a year-old unit, so keep all that in mind. Now, I'm Ben from Authentic, and let's jump right into it. Starting with some daytime photos side by side, here's what I noticed so far. Both cameras are seriously pretty dang good. I love to see how far these smartphone cams have come in just the last few years. The HDR, or high dynamic range, look really good on both. Sharpness and clarity is fantastic, and I'll zoom in for some pixel peeping in just a second. The warm sunrise glow looks beautiful on both, and honestly, I'll say it right from the beginning. If you already have or are going to get either of these phones, you're going to have an awesome camera in your pocket. And remember, a lot of these results come down to personal preference and taste. Everyone has a different preference, and that's okay. Now, a few more finer details I noticed. First, the obvious. The Note has that ultra wide angle lens on that triple camera setup, while the iPhone XS only has that medium and telephoto lens. It's on that brand new iPhone 11 Pro that also has an ultra wide coming to the table. And since you know I already pre-ordered mine, consider hitting that subscribe and bell icon to be notified when I post that in-depth camera comparison video coming very soon. The ultra wide is awesome in my opinion in both photo and video mode. More on that shortly, but without taking a single step back, look at just how much more we can squeeze into camera frame. Another repeated theme, I found the iPhone has a slightly darker image. Overall, it's a little bit more crushed in the shadow areas. Now, on that same side of the coin, the Samsung seems more often produce that brighter shot across the board, all without blowing out or clipping the highlights in photos, which is great to see. It's always funny and interesting when you place two images side by side. My eye personally more quickly jumps to that brighter, more punchy image. It's just a little bit more pleasing to look at. A quick zoom in at 400%, and while the iPhone doesn't look horrible, that Note 10 Plus just has a slightly sharper image. But it's impressive how they both are capturing those tiny details like that spider web across the branch. Another pixel peeping, starting with that ultra wide on the Samsung that looks so cool, then a side by side on the primary lens on both cameras. Pretty similar image on both with just a tiny color difference. Then jumping to the telephoto lens on each, slowly zooming into those two swans. The blues on the iPhone look a tad more vibrant or saturated. Then zooming way in with the digital zoom on each camera, they both again look sort of similar, with the Galaxy Note coming out just a tad sharper, like in those water ripples or the tree branches in the background. Now switching to some front-facing selfie shots, first a few without portrait mode turned on. In these first three shots, we can see that same theme again, with the Note producing a bit brighter image, which I definitely like. My face looks a bit more brightly exposed and keeping my skin tones pretty natural and realistic. Sharpness looks pretty great on both, but I think the Note wins in the fight overall. In this shot, with the camera facing towards the sun, it's brightly backlit. Funny enough, the Note is darker on my face and the iPhone is a little brighter. Now, I kind of wish the HDR was better on both of these for this photo. Turning on the portrait mode with the background blur, they both produce an overall really pleasant looking shot. Field of view is almost the exact same, and each phone does a great job in my opinion with edge outlining and the background bokeh. Colors and exposure look really nice too. It's a little bit better on the Note. On the Note selfie camera, we can punch out to go a little bit extra wide, which is nice for those group shots. I like the option to zoom out wider to capture a bit more into frame, and we can see how slightly wider the Note is over the iPhone. This is another feature that the new iPhone 11 will have, so we'll have to see which one is wider in just a few days. And then there's a few low light photos. Firstly, there's a little bit of light coming into the room from those closed blinds, but it's like night and day difference between the two, no pun intended. The Note 10 has this night mode, which looks to be doing an awesome job, and you might not even tell it's really dark in there if not for the dark and blurry iPhone shots. Even the grain and sharpness still looks pretty great on the Note. Then I went pitch black in the room, and still amazing how well the Note did, at least capturing an okay exposure of detail and image. Though it's a bit noisy and maybe out of focus, funny enough the iPhone looks totally black, showing you what it really looked like like in there. Then again, we can't forget that the new iPhone 11, it'll be coming out with a new night mode as well, so I can't wait to see how that performs and compares. Now onto the video comparison and some of my favorite tests here. Starting with some 4K 30 FPS, just look at the sparkling water reflection on the tree branches and the leaves on the Note 10. Versus the iPhone XS, we can see a little bit of that shimmer, but maybe a little bit less. Looking out over the lake, the blues in the water and the skies look a little bit more saturated and vibrant on the iPhone. Sharpness and clarity in the leaves look really good on both. Punching out on that ultra wide on the Galaxy Note, I love to see how much more fits into frame when using this angle over the primary medium focal length. Now it doesn't look as sharp as the primary lens, which is normally the case with these phones. I'll be intrigued to see if that new iPhone 11's ultra wide is a little soft in video as well, or were they able to keep it sharp all around. White balance and colors look pretty great on both, and the Note looks a tad more reddish in the hues, where the iPhone XS leans a little bit more green, I think. When moving in close to the tree trunk, we can keep an eye out for the HDR on each side. And even though they both again look pretty pleasant, staring right into the sunlight, I think it's a repeated theme you'll notice that the HDR on the iPhone in video mode is better over the Note 10 Plus. Just look at how much more blown out the sun is versus the iPhone's much smaller ring around the sun. Jumping to my quick patent pending autofocus test. This was another key area that I found the iPhone outperformed more consistently and responsive over the Note. There's no trickery or anything going on here. We can just simply see how fast the autofocus is snapping back and forth on my hand and the background, while the Note 10 is flickering back and forth, searching for focus, but failing pretty terribly. Now, I can only hope that a software fix or maybe an app update could resolve this in the future, but until then, the iPhone surprisingly wins in this test. Now trying out an optical and digital zoom comparison, a few things here. Firstly, that Note 10 has quite a bit more zoom range offered in the app, but you can see that the quality degrades pretty harshly, so I'm not sure I'd actually recommend it. Secondly, when pulling back out a little bit, we can see the stabilization is better on the iPhone since these are just handheld shots. When I switch over to just the telephoto lens on each camera with zero digital zoom, I found quality to be about the same on each, with the field of view a tad wider on that iPhone.
4K 30 on each. This is a rear stabilization test.
One thing I'm noticing is the stuttering issue on the iPhone, and I've seen this before and I'm not exactly sure what causes it. It might be the camera mount, but I don't think so.
Now a little bit of a jog.
When switching to a jog, well, it gets really bad, pretty unusable. The Galaxy is looking fairly good overall in 4K.
Wide angle on the Note.
The ultra wide actually looks pretty smooth and stable here as well, which is good to see. The iPhone, again, pretty terrible. Another fun stabilization test on the Galaxy Note 10 Plus in the camera app is the super steady mode we can turn on.
It crops in, goes down to 1080 on the iPhone. Just to be fair, let's switch it to 1080p as well. Let's sync them up and see if that makes a difference for stabilization. Starting with a little walking test.
The walking looks a little bit closer here.
And now a little bit of a jog.
But then of course switching to the jog, the iPhone doesn't look as horrible as in the previous test. So I'm guessing that jello wobbles might be because it was shooting in 4K. But now that we're both shooting at 1080, they do a little bit better. Though the Samsung blows the iPhone out of the water in this super steady mode. Jumping to the front-facing cameras.
This is 1080 on both cameras. Now the Note can go up to 4K on the selfie camera, which is nice. We'll jump to that in a sec. But how does the 1080 look and compare on each?
Both cams look pretty good at 1080p, about the same field of view. As for skin tones, the Note clearly wins. iPhone has been known for this weird softening orangey skin effect. It doesn't look very realistic. Stabilization also goes to the Note here. And then when I pick up the pace, we can clearly see that there's just too much wobble on the iPhone.
Alright, and now we're at 4K on the Note, still 1080p on the iPhone. How does the quality compare?
And of course, the Note wins on this one again. 4K will just look sharper over the 1080p on the iPhone. It's just another little example though that the XS is a little bit outdated. With that new iPhone 11 coming out, it'll be able to shoot 4K even up to 60 FPS on that new front-facing cam. Looking forward to test that.
Both cameras recording at 1080p. This is an audio test on the new Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus, and this is audio on the iPhone XS. How does the audio sound and compare between the two? How does the audio sound and compare between the two? Let's live authentic. Let's live authentic.
In the audio test, they both sound very similar in my opinion. Both are good enough, each get a pass in my book. And then for a slow motion test, both cameras recording here at 240 FPS, and I'd say the Note looks to be adding a little too much over sharpening in its image, but the iPhone looking a little bit too soft. A nice middle ground could be nice. The fluid motion looks nice and smooth, and the only thing I'd say that the iPhone should work on, or hopefully be fixed in their next model, is that slight stuttering effect that happens here and there. Also note the Note 10 Plus can do up to 960 FPS insanity slow-mos, which is super fun to play with, and even though the resolution and quality is a bit lackluster, the new iPhones are still capped at 240 FPS. I find that a bit of a shame. And lastly, some low-light video samples. I find that the Galaxy Note is winning it here as well. Both sides look pretty noisy and grainy. The iPhone's is a little bit blocky and soft, whereas then at least we can see more detail and clarity on the Note side. So here's my concluding thoughts on the results. For photography, well, the Note 10 Plus hands down wins. Killer dynamic range and sharpness. Low light blows the iPhone out of the water. Even the selfie cam and portrait shots look better on the Note. Now, I didn't even get a chance to compare the camera apps, and the Galaxy kills the iPhone in my opinion. There's just so much more versatility and power in their app, while it doesn't even seem like Apple is trying to update their app. It's been forever. It's way too minimal and lackluster of control. As for video mode, well, funny enough, it's a little bit of a tie or back and forth in my taste. For me, I'd like to have consistent and accurate autofocus, and that extended HDR looks better in my opinion on the iPhone. However, the clarity and stabilization on the Note 10 Plus is really nice, and that's not even talking about the triple camera versatility, which just clearly beats out the iPhone XS. I guess we'll just have to wait and see how that new 11 Pro iPhone stacks up. After all, the XS is a year old, so I guess it's a little impressive in itself. I'll say it again, a lot of it comes down to personal preference, so let me know down in the comments which one you like better and why. Let me know of any other phone comparisons you want to see, and until I see you next time, let's live authentic.